Hi, I'm Dolen Perkins-Valdez, and I'm a historical fiction writer. When I'm not writing, I'm teaching. When I'm not teaching, I'm playing with my kids. But the place I love to be the most is in the library. I love to read historical fiction. It just transports me. So I decided to start this book club. Here together, we will read stories featuring women's histories. We'll talk to writers, we'll have discussions. It'll be fun. Come on and join us. Hi, Chris.
Dolen, how are you?
I'm good. Welcome to my book club.
Well, I am so honored to be here. And first of all, 1,000 congrats on Happy Land. Oh my gosh, I loved that novel. Every page, every moment, just a treasure. Congratulations. And congratulations on surviving yet another book tour.
I know. Can you believe it? I saw somewhere online a picture that I think your wife took of your car pulling off. What number book tour was this for you?
This is my 35th book tour. I'm proud of the fact that it was my 25th book, but 35 book tours, that is Iron Person triathlon kind of stuff.
It really is. I'm like, I don't know how you do it.
Yeah. I don't either, but 35 are in the books now.
Yeah, 35 in the books.
I,
And
I, I used to have hair. When I did my first book tour, my hair came down to like here. I could have done bangs.
has it gotten easier over the years, Chris? Or do you still find it like I get butterflies in my tummy sometimes when it starts?
Um, no, it doesn't get easier because I think you always want those butterflies. If you're taking it for granted, that if you might risk phoning it in, and I never ever want to disappoint my readers. I want them to have as much fun as I'm having because I get to do what I do because of our readers. So if they come to one of my events, I want to make sure they have a blast.
Yeah. It's fun, right? Like I always love, especially because, and I'm sure this happens for you, you start to see the same people, your diehard fans. And I always like look forward to seeing those people. I know I saw a woman come for Happy Land, and I remember 15 years ago when I published Winch, I remembered her, it was nice.
And I saw that you were on tour also in Greenville at M. Judson's. How much fun is M. Judson's? I love any
Wow.
tour that does events with booze.
I just love the fact that they're in that old courthouse. If anybody has not been to Greenville, South Carolina, y'all need to take a trip. It's the cutest little town. And they have this bookstore right in the heart of downtown that's in the old county courthouse. And it's just adorable.
Do you remember the drink they had for Happy Land?
It was a cucumber martini.
Perfect.
And it smelled really yummy.
Perfect. Perfect.
Did you go there for the Jackal's Mistress?
I did. I did. And the drink they had for the JACKAL'S MISTRESS was a Bellini, which wasn't so much because it was appropriate for the book, but because they knew from some of my other books, like The Flight Attendant, that
Yes.
clearly I like Bellinis.
Yes. And they know what they're doing in that bar too.
They do. They
Well,
do.
I know we're going to be talking about my book too, because if y'all are listening, Chris and I are friends, and I met him several years back. I was a big fan of his work before I met him. I used to hand sell his work when I would like volunteer at our local politics and prose here. And every time I convinced somebody to buy it, they always were so happy that I had introduced his work. But The Jackal's Mistress is number 25 for you.
Yes.
So I know a lot of people listening have already read the book. And so we can have some slight spoilers here. We're not going to go like the end, but we can get into it. Tell us about, I was so fascinated by your author's note at the end about how you found out about this story, because this is inspired by a true story.
Yeah.
I mean, loosely inspired, right, by this
Right.
true story.
Right. I mean, your author's note at the end of Happy Land and my author's note at the Jackal's Mistress are siblings because we both talk about how we wrote a novel because of a small but important footnote to history that seemed to be an entry into a much larger story. There's that great Yale doctoral quote: we read nonfiction and history, so we know what happened. We read historical fiction, so we know what it felt like. So the Jackal's Mistress had its origins way back in 2003, when my editor at Reader's Digest, a really nice guy named Gary Sledge, said, I just heard this story about an abolitionist in the Vermont Brigade. You live in Vermont. Do you want to write the story and research it? And I said, sure, absolutely. And the story that I wrote for Reader's Digest is a bare bones account because we don't know very many details, but it's fundamentally this. A member of the Vermont Brigade in 1864, a lieutenant, is left for dead after one of his legs is amputated and he has most of one hand blown away. But two formerly enslaved people and the woman they live with decide they're going to keep this man alive when they find him dying in a rebel farmhouse, even though keeping them alive is treasonous in this part of Virginia. They are risking their lives, but they are doing it because it feels like the morally right thing to do. The woman later in life would say that she did it for reasons that we would say today are karma. Her husband was an officer in the Confederate Army and had been captured at Gettysburg and was somewhere in a Union POW camp. She had no idea where. But she would write in 1914, if someone found my husband dying, even a coarse Yankee woman, I would want her to care for him so that I cared for this Vermonter. And that was the genesis of the novel. But in 2003, I wasn't writing historical fiction. I was writing books like Midwives or The Buffalo Soldier or Transistor Radio. Flash forward to 2022. As a matter of fact, my gosh, Dolen, flash forward to the night after you and I did an event together at Politics and Prose, the night we were together in Richmond. Remember that night with the Junior League of Richmond or something?
I do. Yeah.
So that was the night that it dawned on me that Bragg magazine article I had written 19 years earlier mattered now more than ever. Because in Richmond, you feel the weight of history and the Civil War and the shame of slavery dramatically more than you do in Vermont. I mean, the closest thing Vermont had to a Civil War battle was a botched bank robbery at the Canadian border where no shots were fired and no one was hurt. But in Richmond, that night, it really struck me that that article I'd written years ago should be a novel. So I did a deep dive into the research. I went back to the Shenandoah Valley, and I was off and running on what would become the Jackal's Mistress.
And you said, okay, in 2003, you weren't writing historical novels. One of the things about your talent, Chris, is that you are so virtuosic on the page. You can write. I mean, I know a lot of y'all saw Flight Attendant. If you didn't read Flight Attendant, you saw it. You know what he's capable of with a contemporary storyline. You can write a contemporary story. You can write a historical novel. You can write novels about like huge social justice issues such as child trafficking. I mean, you just can do so much on the page.
Well, so can you, my goodness. And
well, I know I'm a one lane.
Well, one of the things I loved about Happy Land was the way you moved back and forth in time, the way we were back in the decades immediately after the Civil War in the 19th century, and then we were in the present. And what's so interesting about Happy Land vis-a-vis the Jackal's Mistress is the first draft of the Jackal's Mistress moved back and forth in time.
Did it?
In the Shenandoah Valley in 1864, and the summer that George Floyd was murdered, 2020, when all of the statues of the treasonous Confederate generals were finally taken down in Richmond on Monument Avenue. So in the first draft, literally we would be with Libby Stedman and Jonathan Weybridge in this tiny, tiny farmhouse by a grist mill in 1864, where she is hiding him from Mosby's raiders. And then then we'd have the interstitial pages, and you would see the statue of Jefferson Davis finally taken down. You would see the statue of Robert E. Lee finally taken down. And I was using a combination of actual broadcast clips and newspaper quotes and fictionalized versions of people who were present, some of whom I met when I went back to Richmond in 2023, researching the book a year after you and I were there.
And then you decided to take out that contemporary storyline?
I did, because I was feeling that, there's a character in the book, Jubilee, my rambunctious teen girl who is no filter.
She steals the show, Chris.
I love writing
so fabulous and cranky, and you just captured that age too.
Well, okay, and Jubilee's the reason why I took out the scenes on Monument Avenue, because Jubilee's messaging was better than ham-handed me trying to recreate those moments in 2020 when each of the statues came down. And so what I did instead was I give Jubilee that epilogue where she gets to talk about the idiocy of those statues and why those statues were there. And it just felt like that was more powerful to me, to have Jubilee drop the hammer and the epilogue, rather than sort of teasing it through in this and slowing the momentum of Jonathan and Libby's story.
Mm-hmm.
Think I made a mistake?
No, I love it. I mean, I want it to be in this world because the characters, every single character was so well drawn. And from Libby to Joseph to Sally to Weybridge, I just thought I didn't want to leave them. I was upset that the book ended, to be honest with you.
I felt the same way about Happy Land.
It could have been another 100 pages.
I felt the same way about Happy Land. Yeah. And I got to tell you, Dolen, I think it is so funny that literally you and I were giving speeches in the same auditorium together the night that I realized I should write this book about that Vermonter abolitionist and that Confederate wife that I'd written a magazine story about 2 decades earlier. I think it's
but you know what? It's good that you waited, because this was like, I think only certain people could have written this book. Like, I think this was your story to write, because, I felt so, you did not make Libby too contemporary. You did not take her out of her element. She is a Confederate wife. She hates Yankees. She, she is a woman of her time and place, even though her husband emancipated the people that his father had passed to him. And so they are, a bit more progressive in their community. She's still a woman of her time and place. I always appreciate that when somebody writes historical fiction, not to make them too contemporary, because people were who they were. Yeah. And so I loved how deftly you handled her, because that because of the way that you wrote her, that made me as the writer, love her.
Did you? Okay. Jubilee stole many scenes for you. Mother Rita stole so many scenes for me. Did you have more fun in the contemporary scenes with Nikki and Mother Rita, or in the historical scenes with Queen Luella and Robert and William?
It's funny because, when we were talking about your versatility as a writer, like, I used to say, I'll never write a story with a cell phone in it. Because what am I going to do with a cell phone? Like, how can you write a scene when there's the possibility that people are looking at their phones all the time? Like, that really just baffled me. And so I still feel more comfortable in the historical timeline. There's a way in which people's attention to things was more measured, more careful, because they didn't have technology, and their reaction to things happening to them, which I think is like the lifeblood of fiction, like how characters react when they're put under pressure, is to me like what makes fiction tick. And I think in the past we can really see how people experience things so intensely.
Whenever,
But I do
whenever,
love Mother Rita in the present. I do love her. But she's an older lady, so I'm still thinking about history.
yeah, then perfect. Well said. And as for cell phones, whenever I'm reading a book or watching something on television or a movie, and there's, they make a big deal. There's no cell phone coverage. I realize, okay, it's a little ham-handed. Clearly, something's about to hit the fan.
Right. Well, I want to invite y'all to put your questions in the chat if you're on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. Put your questions in the chat. We've got about 20 more minutes with Chris. We're happy to answer. Just don't wait till the last minute, y'all. Sometimes y'all wait until the last 30 seconds and then I'm scrambling. So if you have a question for Chris, please feel free to put them in the chat and I'll try to ask. So in the book, am I pronouncing his name right? Weybridge?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, that's the town I live in. You have been to Weybridge. Dolen, when you and Victoria and I were having dinner here, we were in Weybridge, Vermont.
I didn't know where we were.
Yep.
And y'all, Chris has the most beautiful house. There's like sculptures when you drive up his long drive. There are these outdoor sculptures. It's just lovely. And his wife is a phenomenal artist and photographer. Just the dream, y'all.
I will tell her you said that. It'll make her so happy.
Yes, she is. She's a phenomenal photographer. And her art is like all over the walls of the house. It's lovely. So in the book, I will say, I loved all the characters, but there was something about Joseph, his sort of quiet. There was something of, even the way you describe him as like walking really straight for his age. And even like Weybridge notices, like for a man of his age, he has a very straight back, and that to me was such a beautiful character description because what you were capturing was his dignity.
Yes.
And when I say his character, like his intelligence and his morality is what I'm trying to say. Tell me about Joseph and how you were thinking about him. When the book opens, y'all, and I know, a lot of y'all read the book. When the book opens, he saves Libby from being raped. And he's like down to like bury the body. And, and this was very, very risky behavior for a Black man in the 1800s. So tell me about Joseph.
Yeah. Dignity is exactly the right word. Whenever I'm thinking of characters and I'm thinking of what are the 2 or 3 words that come to mind, with Joseph as always, he's dignified and he's underestimated. Mm-hmm. People don't realize not simply how smart he is, how accomplished he is, but how visionary he is for his family. Same with Sally. And one of the things that I toy with a lot in the book, of course, is how Vermont abolitionist Jonathan Weybridge, who is fighting for this cause, even he dramatically underestimates both Joseph and Joseph's wife, Sally. So, for example, Sally, with cause, is really offended when Jonathan Weybridge from Vermont is surprised that she can read and write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Joseph is very much the same way. Joseph is profoundly grateful for Jonathan's sacrifice, but he also doesn't want to see Jonathan's presence endanger Sally, Jubilee, or Libby.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And we know how, and that's part of the suspense of the whole book, is that we know that Jonathan's presence is a danger.
Yeah.
It is a real danger, not just to Libby, but definitely to Joseph and Sally, right? Like
definitely to Joseph and Sally. Yeah. his presence might have gotten Libby Stedman arrested, but she would have been hanged.
Right.
His presence would have gotten Joseph and Sally hanged
Yeah.
instantly. And that's, Joseph knows that.
Mhm.
Sally knows that. They are saving him because it is the morally right thing to do.
Mhm.
But they all understand the danger they're in. And in real life, the woman who inspired Libby Stedman, we don't even know if she ever even held a gun.
Mhm.
But in one of her letters, she does allude to the fact that she hid him in her bedroom because even the rascals like Mosby's Rangers or the stragglers from Jubal Early's Confederate Army wouldn't dare look into a lady's bedroom.
Mhm. Yeah, I love, as novelists, when we look at these historical records that are incomplete, we have to really imagine our way into more of what happened. And it's so interesting. I was just talking about this recently, that if you really are doing the work and listening and being quiet, you can get pretty close with your guesses. You know what I mean? Like, I've had like moments where people have said, that was exactly what it was like. And I'm like, really? I made that up. But I do think that there's a way in which writers can get very, very close to the source without knowing exactly what happened. And I know that sounds woo-woo, Chris.
I mean, you did monumental and monumentally beautiful world building in Happy Land by literally, creating this magnificent planned community of formerly enslaved people based on little bits and pieces
Yeah.
you found in the historical record.
Yeah. And I think anybody that's writing historical fiction is piecing together. Otherwise, we'd be historians,
Right.
right? Like
And
that.
and the wonderful thing about what you do, what I do, what novelists do is this. And I really, really saw this with the Sandcastle Girls. If I had written a memoir of my grandparents' experiences in the Armenian genocide, it would have been read by about 11 people,
Yeah.
all with the last name Bohjalian.
Mm.
By turning it into a novel that isn't my grandparents' story, but is something that might be more universal, and it's a love story. It educated, millions of people around the world to the Armenian genocide. So, in the case of Happy Land, you built this magnificent world that will show people that once upon a time there was this aspirational community
Mhm.
um, did something monumental in the late 19th century, and because it was North and South Carolina, because it was the United States of America, which has always been a racial dumpster fire, would be taken from them. For example, I mean, I learned so much about property rights and inheritance rights from that novel, but never in a nonfiction magazine article sort of way, because of how it impacted multiple generations of human beings in the present and 150 years ago.
Yeah. You probably learned more than you wanted to learn.
No. It's all seamless. All
Okay,
seamless.
let's get to some of these audience questions. If you're on YouTube, I'm able to put them on the screen, which I like. But if you're on Facebook or Instagram, I'll have to just ask. So this person wants to know, what did we struggle most with when it came to concluding the novels?
Do you want to go first?
I guess for me, most people who lost their land, it was a sad, sad ending, because of the law, which continues to be really bad. And so I just had a hard time figuring out how to make the ending uplifting. I actually really like sad endings, but readers don't. So my biggest challenge with all of my books is how to figure out an uplifting ending when the history says
Right.
that quite often the ending of these things was not good.
I like you. I love books that break my heart
Yeah.
at the end. And I love to write books that break my heart at the end.
Me too.
Yeah. So I knew that this was a Civil War Romeo and Juliet. And I know that we've got Libby Stedman and Jonathan Weybridge, North and South, the principal lovers, so to speak, if they are going to become lovers, which is part of the tension of the book. But I also knew that of these 5 main characters, Joseph, Sally, Jubilee, Jonathan, and Libby, that not all of them were going to be alive on the last page of the book.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know who was going to live and who's going to die. And then there was this. When the book opens, Libby has a husband. Jonathan has a wife. If they are going to end up together, how?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I wrestled with most.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know. I was wrestling with that too as the reader. Like, what is going to happen here? That was a good ending, though.
As was yours.
Here's says, not a question, but I wanted Chris to know how much I appreciated Jubilee's words. If you folks want to free the slaves, why don't you treat them like white people? Why all the killing? That Jubilee, man, that Jubilee.
And that reader gets at exactly why Jubilee became my principal messenger in the novel. She's the one who can point out not merely the hypocrisy of white Southerners, but the hypocrisy of white Northerners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She did it too. And it's like, simple question. Simple.
Yeah.
Chris, how do you reconcile constructing characters with identities unlike your own, especially those formerly enslaved characters?
Yeah.
Good question.
It is. And there are lines that I won't cross anymore that I might have crossed earlier in my career. For instance, in the year 2000, I published a transgender love story, Transistor Radio, and I'm proud of it. But in 2025, I wouldn't write a trans love story because I would want the trans community and all those wonderful trans voices to speak for themselves and to tell those stories. But I also know that I can't limit my palette to old cis white male. So every book is different, but every book I make certain distinctions. Is it appropriate for me to have a gay character here? Is it appropriate for me to have a Black character here? Is it appropriate for me to have a woman here? All roles that I am not. But, okay, Dolen and I did an event together for my 2022 novel, The Lioness. And The Lioness is set in 1964 Tanzania. How could I write that novel without having Black Africans and Black Americans? And because it's Hollywood, how could I not have women? How could I not have gay men, gay women? Likewise, in The Jackal's Mistress, how could I write a novel in the Civil War in the Shenandoah Valley without having Black Americans as well as white Americans?
They were there.
Yeah. It's such a good question. And
That
it
is
is
a good question.
that I think about a lot as a writer.
Well, and I think that is what we must do, right? We cannot just make these choices willy-nilly. I think we have to make them with thoughtfulness and respect and care. And, I think that goes for all writers. And, whoever we're writing about, like particularly those with the identities unlike our own, I think, doing the research, doing the, asking the questions. I think that's really what every writer must do. Okay, let's see what else we have on here. Do we have any other questions? This one, it looks like, is for me. What made me decide to lean into the love triangle between Luella and the brothers? I when I was writing it, I wasn't thinking necessarily this, but this is what I think was going on subconsciously in the book, but I wasn't thinking of it like this because in the historical record, Luella was married to both brothers. One, or so we think. She was 1 minute, she's the queen, and William is the king, and then another minute she's the queen, and Robert is the king. And so I don't know that they were romantic together, but we know that she remained the queen for both of the brothers. And I think what I was trying to get at in the book was like, what did Black women want during this time? Like, you're free, you're up on this mountain, you're able to do whatever you want to do. And I wanted to think about like Black women's desires, like what did they desire? And are they free to act on those desires? And I wanted Luella to be free. But I wasn't thinking of that consciously as I wrote the book, but I think by allowing her to be free, it allowed for her to love both of them, if that makes sense.
I love those three characters so much. And I love them because they transcended how damaged they'd been by what they'd endured. I mean, I love writing about characters who are damaged.
Yeah. Well, early in my career, Chris, I did not like doing that. And I remember my friend, the writer, Catherine Ma, had read one of my stories, and she said, Dolen, you have to bruise your characters. And I was like, what? What are you talking about? But that was one of the best lessons I ever got, just her telling me that, because after that, I understood that our job as writers isn't to like protect our characters, and it isn't to like, have them be completely healed and have them do, sometimes people, I had this happen several times on tour. People were asking me about healing in the book. And I felt in some way uncomfortable with that word because, like, yes, on the surface, yes, healing, yes, healing. But I would rather think less about being completely healed and more about every day, like rising to meet the sun, right? Like they got up every day and they loved, and they got up every day and they met the sun and they tried again. They just every day just kept getting up and meeting the sun every day. And so it was more of a process than a state. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And my hope was that even in the end, we get a sense of it continuing to be a process for Nikki and continuing to be a process for Luella. Like every day is a day of healing.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts of the novel is when you meet Vernon and you understand how Vernon is going to change. And you did it in the past and the present, and like in this 2 pages, just brilliant.
Yeah, I tried. I'm still learning. Okay, let's see here. Oh, someone said we recently read Harlem Rhapsody by Victoria Christopher Murray, my friend, and I was struck by how Du Bois and Redmond worked to prove Black people's humanity. Sally and Joseph's humanity was evident throughout The Jackal's Mistress. Was that intentional?
Yes.
Sometimes people join late, Chris, and they miss that we were just talking about them, so we can just kind of.
Yeah, no, I mean, Sally and Joseph are really, really important, not simply to move the plot forward, but they're important in the same way that Jubilee is important as messengers of what the book is really about. In some ways, Jonathan Weybridge and Libby Stedman are, they might get, might get above the title if it's a movie credit, but it's really in some ways Sally and Joseph and Jubilee who make all the points that I want to make.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. And honestly, I think like Libby's evolution is also really fundamental to the book because, yes, I think at the beginning of the book, she is doing it because she would want a union woman to do the same for her husband. But as it goes on and she has to like make these incredible moral choices in order to keep Weybridge alive, it becomes an issue of just who is she as a human being, right? Like as a human being, like this is what a human being does when someone is in need. And it becomes, you know, a book about like less about like the North and the South and a book about like fundamentally who are we, and I love that. I was going to say, and I know we're running out of time. If anybody has a last question, I saw in the afterword that you read um, Charles Frazier's Cold Mountain. And before I even saw that in the end, I was thinking about that novel. And then Michael O'Shaar's Killer Angels, which I read years ago and fell in love with. That's just a gorgeous, really beautiful novel. I was thinking about your language in this book and how it's so lyrical and beautiful and absolutely just like I feel like you can write high literary award-winning fiction and you can write like a page-turning thriller too. And I'm curious about how you were thinking about language in this book and tone and why you chose the language you did. Like, did you feel that this was a story that maybe because it had these elements of love in it, that it needed to be more poetic and lyrical? Like, how did you
Gosh.
decide on the voice?
First of all, I love that. I think I'm really honored. Thank you. I did know that I wanted this book to be to be fundamentally third person omniscient.
Okay.
So that at any point I can be in Libby's head, Sally's head, Joseph's head, Jonathan's head, Jubilee's head. I can be in any of these characters' minds that I want to be. But the thing that I love about third person isn't simply the notion of omniscience, but the way it dramatically increases the vocabulary I can use. When I was writing a book, for example, like Midwives, which is narrated by a, at the time, contemporary 30-something young OBGYN resident, a woman looking back on when she was 14, I'm limited not simply by what she can know at the time, but I'm limited by how she was going to be likely to speak. When I was writing Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands, it's narrated by a 15-year-old Vermont teenager. So I'm limited to a 15-year-old Vermont teenager's vocabulary. For The Jackal's Mistress, I had none of those limitations. So with all of the lyricism that a love story might command.
I think people underestimate the kind of control you have to have as a writer to write a book like this. Like your control at the level of the line, like just your sentences are, some of these sentences are just like stunningly, just stunningly gorgeous. And, I really was inspired reading this. And, as we close, I just want to say if there's anybody on the call who has not read The Jackal's Mistress
or Happy Land,
please, and look at that cover.
Look at that cover.
Pretty covers. I love both of these covers. She's holding a gun in her dress with a hat on. Badass. As I read it, I was just really studying. I was studying the language and thinking like some of these lines are just phenomenally beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I think I don't see any other, I see lots of people on Instagram, but no more questions. So I'm going to just say thank you, Chris, for.
Oh, and I raise my glass to you. It is such an honor to be part of Dolen's book club. And Dolen, we've got to get together in person, whether it is in your neck of the woods or my neck of the woods at some point this year. It's been too long that we've actually been in the same room together.
Yes, and we're gonna make that happen. We can't let too much time pass until we are in the same room.
And I got you, and 1,000 congrats on following up the absolutely brilliant Take My Hand with the absolutely brilliant Happy Land. That is just awesome stuff.
Thank you, Chris. So everybody, make sure to check out Chris's book. I'm going to post this video on my Instagram page. So if you didn't catch it live tonight, watch it whenever. And please make sure support authors in hardcover. Look at that. Don't y'all want that on your shelf? Gorgeous. Yeah. I'm in love with books.
Me too.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you.
Dolen, thank you. Take care and be well. And thank you all for watching and tuning in.